Welcome back, listeners, to Sandman Stories Presents, a folklore podcast where I read you to sleep or until the next story. I am your host, Dustin. And if you'd like to hear me raunchy and sweary, there's a Sandman Stories After Dark Patreon. You can join at any level, and it's just me reading dirty tales. Today we are back in the book of Korean folk tales written down by W.E. Griffis. And as you know by now, I had to rewrite some of the story as Griffis seems to be paid by the letter. This is a sad story of sacrifice which does result in the death of a child. Just a warning for those who might not want to listen to that sort of story. Okay, let's begin. The Voice of the Bell. When Taejo, the great general and first king of Korea, founded a new dynasty, he moved the capital near the great river Han. He resolved to build a mighty city called Hanyang, or the place north of the river. It was to have a high wall around it and lofty gates on each side. However, the people commonly called the city Seoul, or capital. All roads in the kingdom lead to it. He was happy when the workmen came upon a bell while digging the foundation for Dongdaemun. It was a lucky omen, and they carried it at once over to the king. He hung it over the entrance to his palace, and it hangs there still. But such a bell could only make a tinkle, while King Taejo wanted one that would ring out loud and long. He was especially anxious about this, for in Shilla, once a rival state, one of the biggest bells in the world had hung there, and Taejo wanted one that was even better than that famed striker of the hours. He wanted to have even a larger bell to hang in the central square in the heart of Seoul, so that it could be heard by every man, woman, and child in the city. After that, it must be able to flood miles of hills and valleys with its melody. By this sound, the people would know when to get up, cook their breakfast, sit down for supper, or go to bed. On special occasions, his subjects would know when a king's procession was passing, or when a royal prince or princess was getting married. It would sound out a dirge when, His Majesty being dead, all the land must mourn, and people wear white clothes for 3 years, and Korea becomes a land of mourners. The guardian spirit of the city would have its home in the bell. Word was sent out by messengers who rode on big horses, little ponies, donkeys, and bulls to all the provinces, publishing the king's command to all governors, magistrates, and village heads to collect copper and tin to make the bronze bell. The bell was to stand 10 feet above the ground and be 8 feet across, that is, as high and wide as a Korean bedroom. On the top was going to be 2 terrible-looking dragons forming the framework by which the bell was to be hung. Weighing so many tons that it would balance 500 fat men on a seesaw, only heavy beams made of whole tree trunks could hold it in the belfry, which must be strong enough to stand the shaking when the monster was rung. It had no clapper inside, but outside was a long log, swung by heavy ropes from pulleys above. The men pulled it back and let it fly, striking the boss on the bell's surface. This awoke the music of the bell, making it toll, boom, rumble, growl, hum, croak, or roll sweet melody accordingly as the bellman desired. So the procession of bull carts on the road to Seoul creaked with ingots of copper. Many donkeys had swallowed gallons of bean soup at the inn stables before they dropped their load of metal in the city. Meanwhile, hundreds of bulls bellowed under their weight of the brushwood and timber put on their backs to feed the furnaces, which were to melt the metal for the mighty bell's casting. A deep pit was dug to hold the core and the mold, and hundreds of fire clay pots and ladles were made ready for when the red-hot stream would be ready to flow. All the boys in Seoul were waiting to watch the fire kindle, the smoke rise, the bellows roar, the metal run, and the foreman give his signal to tap. When the fire imp on the volcano heard what was going on, he was awfully jealous, never thinking that common men could handle such metal, properly direct the roaring flames, and cast so big a bell. He snorted at the idea that King Taejo's men could beat the bells that hung in China's mighty temples or in Shilla's pagodas. But when there wasn't enough, and the copper collectors were still at their work, one of them came to a small village and called it a house where lived an old woman carrying a baby boy strapped to her back. She had no coin, cash, metal, or fuel to give, but was quite ready to offer either herself or the baby. In a tone that showed her willingness, she said, "May I give you this boy?" The collector paid no attention to her, but continued on, taking nothing from the old woman. When in Seoul, however, he told the story, and thus it came to pass that many heard of the matter and remembered it later. So when all was ready, the fire-clay crucibles were set on the white-hot coals. The blast roared until the bronze metal turned into liquid. Then, at the word of the master, the hissing molten stream ran out and filled the mold. Patiently waiting till the metal had cooled, alas! They found the bell had cracked. The casting was raised by means of heavy tackle, erected at great expense on the spot, and the bell was broken up into bits by stalwart blacksmiths, wielding heavy hammers. Then a second casting was made, but again, when cooled, it was found to be cracked. 3 separate times this happened until the price of the palace had been paid for work, fuel, wages, and yet there was no bell. King Tejo was in despair. Yet instead of crying or pulling his topknot or berating the artisans, who had done the best they could, he offered a large reward to anyone who could point out where the trouble lay, and show what it was lacking, and thus secure a perfect casting. Then out stepped a workman from the company, who told the story of the old woman, and said that the bell would crack after cooling unless her proposal was accepted. Anyway, he said, the hag was a sorceress, and if the child were not a real human being, no harm could be done. So the baby boy was sent for, and when the liquid metal had half filled the pit, was thrown into the mass. There was some feeling about feeding a child to the fire demon, but when they hoisted the cooled bell up from the mold, lo, the casting was a perfect success, and everyone apparently forgot that a human life had entered the bell. Soon with file and chisel the great work was finished. The hanging ceremonies were very impressive when the bell was placed in the city central square, where the broad streets from Namdaemun and those looking to sunrise and sunset met together. Suspended by heavy iron links from the staple on the stout timber frame, the bell's mouth was exactly a foot above ground. Then around and over it the belfry was built. The names of the chief artisans who cast the bell and of the royal officers who supervised the hanging ceremonies were engraved on the metal. It was decided, however, not to strike the bell until it was fully housed, and the suspended log, as thick as the mast of a ship, was made ready to send forth the initial boom. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of people waited to hear the very first music of the bell. Everyone believed it would be good luck and that they would live longer for it. The boys and girls were listening so hard they could barely get to bed, and some were afraid they might fall asleep when it rang. The little folks, whose eyes were usually fast shut at sunset, begged hard to stay up that night until they could hear the bell. But some fell asleep because they could not help it, and their eyes closed before they knew it. "What shall the name of the bell be, your majesty?" asked a wise counselor. "Call it Injung," said King Tejo. "That means man decides. For every night at 9 o'clock, let every man or boy decide to go to bed. Except magistrates, let not one male person be found on the streets on pain of being paddled. From that hour until midnight, the women shall have the streets themselves to walk in." The royal law was proclaimed by trumpeters, and it was also ordained that at every morning and evening, at sunrise and sunset, the band of music should play at the opening and shutting of the city gates. So Injung, or masculine decision, is the bell's name to this day. And as of yet, the bell was silent. It had not spoken. But when it did sound, the people of Seoul discovered that it was the most wonderful bell ever cast. It had a memory and a voice. It could wail as well as sing. In fact, some to this day declare that it can cry. For, whether in childhood, youth, middle, or old age, in joy or gladness, the bell expresses their own feelings by its change of note, lively or gay, in warning or congratulation. At 9 o'clock on the first night of the 7th moon, the great bell of Seoul sounded. The 7th month being the month of the star maiden of the loom and the ox boy with his train of attendants, who stand on opposite sides of the river of heaven and cross over the bridge of birds. At 9 o'clock, all the men were in their rooms, ready to put on their pajamas and go to bed at once, while all the women, fully clothed in their best, were on their doorsteps ready, each with a lantern in her hand, for their outdoor stroll. 4 strong men seized the rope, pulled back on the striking log a whole yard's distance, and then let it fly. The timber bounded back, and out gushed a flood of music that rolled across the city in every direction, and over the hills, filling leagues of space with their sweet sound. The children clapped their hands and danced with joy. They knew they would live long, for they had heard the sweet bell's first music. The old people smiled with joy. But what was the surprise of the adult folks to hear the bell could talk? Yes, it actually sounds like it made a sentence. Moo, ma, 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 la, 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 until it ended like a baby's cry. Yes, there was no mistake about it. This is what it said. My mother's fault, my mother's fault. And to this day the mothers in Seoul, as they clasp their darlings to their bosoms, resolve that it shall be no fault of theirs if they ever lack love or care. They delight in their little ones more, and lavish on them a tenderer affection because they hear the great bell talk, warning parents to guard what heaven has committed to their care. The end. This was a sad story, and it also shows some of the old Korean stuff. So there was a time when no men could go out and only women could go out. The bell is true. Hearing of human sacrifice in the bell is true. I was unsure of it at first, but I looked up the wonderful, wonderful Korean historian Robert Neff and found articles of his, and that sort of thing happened. In Japan, they had it with bridges where they had to bury a person alive in there. So sad story, but I did like it. And the podcast Shoutout is to our show, hosted by Conscious and frequently co-hosted by Beat Unique. This show brings me so much good music. I've learned about Marlowe, Jackie Mendoza, Sampa the Great, I Make Mad Beats, and many others. Conscious also keeps things local with his Ozone, Orlando's Own segment, which highlights local music. I'm a huge fan of the show and of local music, and so if you love their show as much as I do, go and give them a like, a rating, and a review. And the listener shoutout is to San Fernando, Trinidad. According to Google, San Fernando, officially the city of San Fernando, is the most populous city and the second most populous municipality in Trinidad and Tobago, after Chaguanas. Sando, as it is known to many local Trinidadians, occupies 19 square kilometers and is located on the southwestern part of the island of Trinidad. It looks like a sunny and beautiful place, and my awesome coworker made some punch that was Trinidadian punch, and it was so tasty. Peanut punch, I do believe. And so I really hope to visit there someday, and to my listener in Sando, I say thank you and good night.